I wanted to ask you this question. What does being Quapaw mean to you personally today?
I probably can't answer you without crying. Pride, much pride. I think about my ancestors and what they must have gone through so that we can be sitting here today, you and I. They endured and they sacrificed a lot of things for us to continue to be Quapaw today. So I'm very proud of that. Words can't express how glad I am that I was brought up like I was and that I lived the life I did as a Quapaw.
Well, you're listening to The Underview, an exploration in the shaping of our place. My name is Mike Rush, and today we continue our journey through the layered histories that have shaped this land and its people. Today, I have the privilege of sharing a table with Barbara Kyser-Collier, an elder of the Quapaw Nation. She has spent her life advocating for tribal sovereignty, economic self-sufficiency, and the preservation of the Quapaw culture. She has not only witnessed the transformation of the Quapaw Nation, she has helped to shape it. Her early efforts in tribal administration, to her work in tribal identity, to her leadership in gaming and economic development, Barbara's story has something to teach us. But perhaps more than anything, it's a story about what it means to carry history forward while fighting to secure a future for the generations to come. Her story matters because the story of the Quapaw Nation is the story of this place. Their history is written into the land, into the treaties that reshaped their homeland, and into the systems that still determine who holds power today. In this second season of The Underview, the story of Northwest Arkansas, we are working to understand what I call our communal theology of place, meaning the things that we believe about ourselves and the place we live. This is a conversation about that ongoing work of belonging. And so to understand Northwest Arkansas, we have to understand all of its stories, what has been lost, what has been taken, and what still remains. Barbara's voice reminds us that history is not a thing of the past. It's still alive and it's still shaping our world today. But within that history lies something even more vital, Indigenous knowledge, born into this land and carried forward through generations. To understand the story and the lived experiences of the Quapaw people is to understand our own place here, now, today. Much to cover. Join me as we travel to Quapaw Tribal Headquarters in Oklahoma to sit with Barbara and to hear her story. Well, I have the privilege today of sitting with Mrs. Barbara Kyser-Collier, who's an elder with the Quapaw Nation. And Ms. Collier, thank you for the opportunity to sit and share a table with you. I'm honored and humbled to be able to do that, and I look forward to hearing your story, but thank you for being here today.
Thank you, and I'm honored to have been asked and to represent the Quapaw Nation, and I'll do the best I can do to give you a little background of what I have knowledge of the tribe. Been around for 76 years, so I've been Quapaw my whole life, was raised Native American and lived Native American and worked Native American. So for several tribes, not just the Quapaw Nation, but the several other tribes in the Northeast area also.
I look forward to hearing all of your story, and so to the extent that you want to share it, but maybe let's start there. I'd love to understand your background and wherever you want to start, however you want to define your story. I'd be really curious to know your background.
My grandmother was full blood, and my great-grandfather, of course, too. My mother was half because her father was English. And then, of course, my father was not Quapaw either. So I'm a quarter, but nowadays that's getting more rare as the bloodline thins. So there aren't a lot of quarter bloods either. And I'm really proud of that. I I'm not very dark complected. My mother was a beautiful woman, very. You could tell by looking at her that she was Native American. But as we grow older, we lose our color a little bit. And of course, our hair turns gray and white, and it's not dark anymore. But anyway, that's life. My mother was on the second business committee that was created by Robert Whitebird Sr. in 1956. He took it upon himself to get the tribe a resolution to act on. He was a very wise businessman and a full-blood Quapaw. He traveled himself at his own expense. Of course, the tribe didn't really. What existed was those folks that were on the roll that were allotted land here when they were removed from Arkansas the last time. It was just a community of people, I guess you would say, and no formal government as such. So he went to Washington and met with those that be, powers that be, whomever that was, to get the tribe known. And whatever he did, it worked. So he created this business committee with this resolution. And then my mother was one of the ones that was on the second one, I believe. And then my father, of course, was very supportive of her in her endeavors with the tribe and whatever she did. And they were close to Robert Whitebird, was like a father to her because her father died when she was very young. But they were close friends for the rest of their lives, all of them. So we grew up. She was on the business committee, as I said, and then they were on powwow committees and things like that. When the ceremonies continued, would assume, I really don't know, I haven't heard anyone say, but they never stopped. Originally, as I'm sure you are aware, some of the Quapaw's own millions of acres of land in what's now Arkansas and some of Louisiana and those states over in the east, until the government started removing Native American tribes from the east and bringing them further west, as well as more settlers. And as we often know, they're white people.
Yes. Right.
Whether they were white or whether they were orange or yellow or black, I don't know, but the others. I'm sure the French were probably more dark-skinned than probably some of the English and so on and so forth. And we have several treaties, as is known in our history, starting in 1818, I believe it was, and moving on. And we just celebrated recently, November 15th, 2024, 200 years of the final removal of the Quapaws to Indian Territory. And it makes me almost want to cry. It's sad, but proud, I guess you could say. Because at that time, the last time that they were removed from their homelands, of course, they had been made many promises from the government and from the very beginning. But then I stop and think about what was then. And maybe that's not right to do, but because it's very sad, as well as it could make you angry if you really wanted to dwell on it. Those people lived a wonderful life. They had plenty of pristine land to grow things. They were farmers and hunters. And they had plenty of wildlife to sustain them. You know, there was approximately 10,000 originally that came from the Sioux and the other Sioux Indians. And the Omaha went upstream, means upstream, and Quapaw, Ogapaw means downstream people. And then there were the middle people. And so they got separated when they traveled to begin with. So that made them even less than what they were originally. And then to get removed and promised things by the government several times, I always envision a feather that's just broken, an eagle feather that's broken in two because they broke promises. how could you expect Native Americans that couldn't even speak English, that didn't even have English names, to be overtaken by this American government from England, basically, and France partially, and so on and so forth? They couldn't even understand what they were being told. They believed that the government would do what they said they would do. And then, of course, the government never did. So once in 1824, when they got moved here, finally, the leaders of the tribe, and at that time, the Ogallpa tribe, they had 4 chiefs, of which one was the head chief. And they were longhouse livers, dwellers. They lived in longhouses. I don't know that anyone can know because there's no photos, but probably like family communities, I would guess, they had to cook on fires and they had to use anything that was available to sustain their life. But the chiefs would meet when they need to, and they decided when we were sent here finally to Indian Territory, which wasn't Oklahoma at the time, that they did not want the tribe to receive money. They wanted each individual to be allotted land so that they could try to survive. And so each individual on the roll at that time, and I'm not sure how many there were, after moving back and forth, each tribe has their Trail of Tears. They were moved. They got smallpox. They got diseases. They died of starvation. Think of how hard it would be to walk 100 miles. They had no transportation, but you wanted to go home. They wanted to go back to Arkansas. So every time they were removed, they tried to return, a lot of them. And of course, they never made it. There were not very many on the roll at that time that received the 240 acres of the lot. And at that time, my grandfather was, I think, in his 30s, my great-grandfather, and my grandmother was just 3 years old. But she received an allotment anyway. And it was partially conjoined by my great-grandfather's allotment. But that was a wise thing that they did. They knew the government had not kept their promises all those years and for hundreds of years. And so they wanted each individual to be able to sustain their life. And so that was the beginning from coming from Arkansas. And they were potters. And pottery is a major asset that the Quapaws still have today, as well as farming and celebrations and things. And they were very giving people and very trusting people, which is sad because that's what was part of their downfall. It wasn't really a downfall. It wasn't their fault that the government didn't keep their promises. But anyway, I, as a little girl, grew up not knowing all of that until I became an adult, but knowing that my mother believed in her tribe and her people and was taught celebrations and dances, different ways of even to burial ceremonies and coming out ceremonies and the ceremonies that so you can dance and so you can have eagle feathers and just different things like that. Prejudices were, I don't know if they were in Arkansas. I'd be curious to know that, really. But whenever we arrived finally in Oklahoma, of course, there were already a lot of other tribes in Oklahoma, and each one at that time had a reservation, which is what we were allotted. But that is one thing that these new laws that have come out in Oklahoma and in the United States recently, more in the last few years, have shown the Quapaws never relinquished their reservation status.
And you're referring to the McGirt decision.
The McGirt, and some of the others. So we still have a reservation. For years after my career even began with the Quapaw Nation, we were told there's no reservations in Oklahoma. They always said that there's no reservations in Oklahoma. That's not true. Some of the 5 civilized tribes still had their status, and then the Quapaws and I think one other tribe. The Quapaws retained they never relinquished their reservation status. So we still have our reservation status, where a lot of the tribes did for whatever reason, probably because they were forced to for some reason or other. But we never did, so we have found that out just in the last few years. And so that's a very positive thing for our nation. There were several Indians, of course, the Quapaws, in this area that became wealthy, and prejudices were not big or a big issue, but to some they were. And then when you traveled somewhere, I can remember as a child, we traveled, my dad's position with his career deemed him to leave town whenever he had vacation, or they wouldn't leave him alone. And so we would always go somewhere. And I can remember one time traveling up north a little bit further. Maybe we were going to Yellowstone or somewhere, I don't even remember where. But we went in a restaurant and sat down to eat. Get what? And they waited on everyone but us. And we waited and waited. And finally, I can remember my mother looking at my dad, just like it was yesterday, and saying, "Let's go." And they wouldn't wait on us because we were Indian. So their prejudices ran deeper there than they did here. But of course here, during the Depression, lead and zinc was found on the allotments, some of the allotments, and several of the Quapaw families became wealthy. My grandmother, at one time during the Depression and during the early 20s, was probably one of the richest women in the world. But she really didn't care. She knew she had money, and so she did what she wanted and when she wanted. But we have been assured, and it's pretty much been proven, that she wasn't the only one that retained wealth from her lead and zinc mines. And my great-grandfather had some. Our family together they had 5 mines. But as far as me as a child growing up, I grew up with that knowledge. And I was proud to be Native American, proud to be an Indian. Then we didn't call it Native American back then, we called it Indians. I can see people now, say for instance, when I come to our meal program next door, I can see people that I went to high school with and I never knew they were an Indian. Mm-hmm. But they're there eating free now because they are an Indian. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think I'm glad that they're proud they're an Indian now, but the reasoning is not there. It's sad that just because there's benefits now. That I've been here since the beginning and there was no money. Even though some Quapaws became wealthy, the tribe itself had no money. I can probably go on to some of your next questions. I'll cover some of that stuff that happened, but.
Yeah, maybe I would say thank you, because in many ways, you're welcome to just continue to talk, because you've seen so much and you've been a part of so many stories. Maybe before we get into some of the questions just about kind of some of the history and culture and where we are today, I wanted to ask you this question. You've hit on it a little bit, but maybe I want to ask you directly, what does being Quapaw mean to you personally today?
I probably can't answer you without crying. Pride, much pride, much pride. I think about my ancestors and what they must have gone through so that we can be sitting here today, you and I. And I know as far back as my mother and father, my grandmother, I didn't know my great-grandfather, but he was the second chief. And I wouldn't have been a good Indian back then. I know I wouldn't have. Whenever we do things today, make pottery or do beadwork or make ribbon skirts or have a powwow, I think about what they had to do that. Knowing from the 70s, 60s, 50s, and on up what we had to do to have a powwow, what they had to do. And then I, like making pottery in pottery class, did those ladies sit and talk about their kids or what happened yesterday or while they were making pottery? Or I'm sure it was harder because there weren't lights, there wasn't anything, just the natural nature of things. So it would have been very difficult. And they endured and they sacrificed a lot of things for us to continue to be Quapaw today. So I'm very proud of that. It's very heartfelt for me to think that my ancestors before me had to struggle so much. But I guess everybody did. It wasn't just them. But then they got removed and they got treated like they did. And that to me is very sad. That, of course, the government these days is probably not any different than it was then, and they do whatever they want to do, it seems. But not to be anti-government, but because I'm glad that we're living in the United States and we're free, but they were done wrong. And a lot of people come over here and say, you're a foreigner, or they try to do this or they do that. And I don't want to get too political, but the Indians were here. This is our land. And it's all been taken from us. And not us, but from our ancestors. And because they shared, they were willing to do that. And then were killed and called savages and went through who knows what. Television doesn't tell the truth. Books don't even tell the truth. Columbus didn't discover America. Indians did. And that's not ever been told correctly. So I think I would like to see Native Americans today get their just due as far as history. I think it's only fair. But to me, being part of an ancestor, part of that, just makes me prouder than anything. Words can't express how glad I am that was brought up like I was and that I lived the life I did as a Quapaw.
I think sitting across the table from you, people won't be able to see what I see, but I can see in your face the pride that you express at a greater cost than I could ever imagine. And so I thank you for your vulnerability and that. And thank you for being a truth teller in so many ways. I think part of these conversations are to have an honest and authentic conversation about the truth and reality of where we are today and how we got here. And these stories, your story, is critical to that for us to understand what does it look like to live in the place that we do and to be honest about the history of what happened here with the hope of, gosh, I don't even know if I can say that. And I don't know that it may be with the hope that there is a way forward to honor, I dare say, to work towards restoring or repairing all that has been taken. And you've left me without any questions now. That's the profoundness of what you say is, I think my response is to be quiet and to be still.
In honor of our families that have gone on before us, a moment of silence is always a good thing because we can reflect on that, on them. And not to say that I'm not glad I'm part of my father's heritage. They were German and a lot of other things. And there are no pure-blood Quapaws any longer. Robert Whitebird was the latter of the last male, and Gina and And Hawkwind Blue was the last female that was a full blood that passed away. We're all mixed with something. And it's not that we deny our other heritage. I've never denied my other heritage. My great-grandfather on my dad's side was told that he should change his name because it was Kaiser, and during the war, that was really a bad thing.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah. And so he didn't change it, but he changed the spelling. That's one of those things that happens, and we have no control over that. Just like they had no control over their lives, even though they should have. They tried to, and they tried to do what was right with the government, but the government, of course, did them wrong. And we all know that. And it continues today. I'm not saying it's over. I moved from Oklahoma about 6 years ago and lived in Oklahoma all my life until then. The current governor of Oklahoma, I have nothing good to say about him. And of course, it's not wrong to want what's best for Oklahoma, but it's wrong to want what's best at the price of others. And still the Native Americans they're wanting to take advantage. And they wouldn't have some of what they have now if it wasn't for the casinos at all the Native tribes. And there's 35 gaming tribes in Oklahoma currently that are paying them big money. Continue to be greedy? Is that a good policy? I don't think so. But let's not get off on that.
I do want to understand, you've had a significant contribution to the Quapaw Nation. I know you are the chair of the Cultural Committee. And for those listening, it wasn't until 1978 that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed that really made it legal again for the culture of all Indigenous Native American people to be practiced without fear, I could maybe dare say. You're also a member of the Ogapa Wisdom Keepers as well, too. I had the privilege last month of attending the film screening at Crystal Bridges, where we were able to meet and to watch a film about the story of the Ogapa people. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you've had a significant contribution to your people and to this place. And I would love to understand, as you think through that, I'd love for you to share your roles, what those roles mean to you, what work you feel like has been important to the cultural restoration and the keeping of that wisdom for so many years.
When I moved, like I say, I lived in Oklahoma in Ottawa County all my life until about 6 years ago. But I moved back to Miami. I think it was in 1972 or 3, and had to find a place to live and for my daughter and myself and a job, because I left my job and where I'd lived and moved back to town. So I got a job with Jake Whitecrow, who had started a group called Intertribal Council in Miami. And was several tribes, 5 tribes that were in the area, and 3 tribes that were not at the time regulated. Not regulated, but with the government.
To be recognized.
Recognized, yes. Yeah. And so they had business managers, each tribe did. And the Quapaw tribe was, I think, the first, and the Seneca tribe, second, to move from on their own and have their own facility. But I worked in accounting there at an Intertribal Council for about a year. And the business manager was Lloyd Buffalo at the time. He was the first one. And the chairman was Jesse McKibben. And the 8 tribal leaders were on the board of Intertribal Council. There was an opening for a clerk typist, second employee with the Quapaw office. And they came to me and asked me if I would be interested in applying or doing that job. And I told them I'd be very honored to. It would mean a lot to me to do that. And this was in 1974. And so I was hired and went to work then. And our office was in an old hotel building in downtown Quapaw with leaky pipes and cockroaches and all sorts of things that you wouldn't dream of. But we operated for 2 or 3 years on a grant, a community development block grant from the government for $25,000 a year. That paid 2 salaries, the taxes, the rent, anything, supplies, whatever we had to have. $25,000 a year. But it was great. We continued that the business committee, as set up by the resolution, with Jess as chairman, and there's always 7 members, continued to want to have this powwow celebration every year. And of course, as the only office staff, we were in charge of doing that. And we had no money. We had to have pie suppers, what do you call them, where you go shoot, turkey shoots, and ticket sales for prizes, and just that people would donate. And we had, of course, our tribal grounds. It didn't look anything like it looks now. It looked like a rundown, I don't know, little shacks here and there. But it was fine. It was fine. It was good. We had a great time. Now, Beaver Springs, where the tribal office is, part of my family's heritage. It was my great uncle's allotment. And that's where our family cemetery is, up on the hill there. And their home was very nice back then. Of course, they had money from the mines, and they were very giving people, but them, as well as the Odestein McWaters family and others, contributed to having a big, it was like a big, they'd have merry-go-rounds and all sorts of things. And people would come, other tribes would come from miles, and they would bring them and they would feed them, and they would celebrate with them for a week or so, and then they'd pack them up so they could go home. Some of them came horseback, some of them came by wagon, and it was just a celebration. And that continued for many years. So I learned about a lot of things about the treaties and when I started working for the tribe. And then along, the Intertribal Council built a new building out by the turnpike went in, had gone in the 50s, I think it was. And they built a new building out by there, and they wanted to put up flagpoles for all 8 of the tribes. In the meantime, I think back in the 80s, the 3 tribes that were not recognized were re-recognized. The Eastern Shawnees, the Wyandots, and the Peorias maybe, or the Miamis. I don't remember which now for sure, which ones it was. But anyway, so that made 8. So they put up these big, and they're still there, the big poles. But they wanted each tribe to contribute flags so that they could fly them on these flagpoles. The Quapaw Nation had no flag or symbol or seal. The 5 civilized tribes, of course, had already had that, and they were copying after that. So the tribes started coming up with a seal for each one. And Lloyd and I, and by that time we had a 3rd employee that was working part-time, Walter King Jr. And we looked into fashioning the seal as we have it now. And we, like I said, we had no money. So I drew a picture of it on the back of a calendar pad. Took the cardboard off the calendar pad and drew it on there, so that we could show them this is what we're going to have. And because of the traders, and back in when we probably in the, not 1818, but maybe 1824 or maybe 1833, the French befriended us. We have several families today that are partly French. And so French and English, of course, brought things. from Europe over here and traded. We traded with them. And one of those was broadcloth. And of course, broadcloth originally, back in those days, the only colors that I saw was red and blue. And they always had a salvage on the edges of them that was like a stripe with a yellow or gold. And so we took that as our base because that was helped sustain us, back in the 20s and 30s. And then the buffalo, of course, was almost extinct by the time most settlers came about and went west. But that was I heard somebody say one day, that was our Walmart.
Yep.
They used everything. Every part of the buffalo they used for something. The meat to eat, or the hides, or the bones, or the internal organs, some of them. And so that's how they sustained their part of their life. So that was our figure that we felt should be a part of it. And then a shield, which we were not really warriors. There were warriors. We did have warriors, but we were farmers and gatherers. We were peaceful people, unless we were made not to be. And so the shield there with the leather around it and the buffalo inside. And of course, grass, Mother Earth, and the sky. And so that's what we believe in, and we sustained us. And then the 4 cardinal directions. 4 is a special number for the Ogallpaw. And there was eagle feathers from all 4 directions on there. And then the name Ogallpaw. So that's why the flag is such as it is. And now, since the name has changed, the Quapaw Nation goes on top. But we were very proud when we got through. And I went outside. I think we had a camera, a Polaroid camera, or somebody did. And we took that cardboard picture outside and took a picture of it. I don't know whatever happened to it. But anyway, we were very proud. To get these flags, they wanted them to be huge because these flagpoles were so big. I don't know how many feet long they were, maybe 20 feet, 8 by, I don't know, they were huge. And back then, they didn't do so much of, what did they call it, screen printing. So we had an artist. I knew an artist that I grew up down the street from, named John Fitzgibbon. So we got canvas, blue and red, painted blue and red, and had him paint the pictures on both sides of these flags. We bought 3 of them, and he painted all 3 of them. Of course, eventually they cracked and looked awful, but by then they were creating printed things at other manufacturing, so on and so forth. But that was our story about our logo.
Keep going, right? I do have a question about that.
Okay. And then, of course, as time progressed, we wrote more grants and contracts and got more things from the government. And of course, it was all government-funded programs, but it wouldn't be enough to have it. Like, we might get something for arts or education. It might be $4,000 a year. What can you do with $4,000 a year? You can't even, that's not even a salary, even back in those days. But we got enough programs, and we got a program called Indian Action Team. And we hired a Quapaw man, Bill Ellick, to be the director of that. And he was able to get 10 Quapaw guys, young men and women, there was a couple of girls, to train them to build construction, and built the tribal office, the initial tribal office, out at Beaver Springs now, that sits there by the gate. And so they built that from start to finish, drew the plans, did the building, did all the construction, and learned how to do that as well as do it. And we were the first tribe then to have our office facility, our own office facility of the 8 tribes. And so that progressed. And as I say, all along, each year we would have a powwow. We would have raise money for that and this and that. And then it just kept growing from grants and things. We built the community building that's still there. They came in and did some things. But when we had our first powwows down there, it was all volunteer security, volunteer. There were two guys in Quapaw. One was a sheriff. His name was Hoot Gibson. And he looked like a old-timey sheriff. He wore khaki pants with his pant legs stuffed down in his boots and a big gun on his hip and an old sweaty banded hat. But they volunteered, and then people would come down just to put electric to a camp, just so they'd have a light bulb, not so they'd have air conditioning or electric skillets or anything like that, or mobile homes, which now they have. But this was primitive, and people cooked on open fires and open fireplaces and had outhouses. Everybody. So it was, but we continued to celebrate our existence and to keep doing what our ancestors taught us to do during all those times. And then as in the 80s, we finally got to Big Bingo. Before then, there was a young man that came through this area, and he was writing a series of books. He went through OU Press. I assume he had something to do with OU, the university. And he wrote these series of books about the different tribes. And we were one that was chosen. We got when he finished, the publishing company sent us, I think it was 2,500 books. And with the books, there was a medallion, 99.9% pure silver. And they were all numbered, and they were in plastic, in other words, in little containers. And so we sold those for $25 a piece. And I can remember going over to the bank and making the deposit, and was happy leaping across the street, coming back saying we had $10,000. Was elated because we had $10,000 in the bank. It was hard times. It was really hard times to get started. But once we got Big Bingo, then we got a little bit of money and coming in. And of course, that went back and forth for several years also, not succeeding and then succeeding and so on and so forth. So the tribe grew from there, but there was 2 employees in 1974 with $25,000 budget, and now there's probably 300 and have billions of dollars.
I'm curious, being a part of not only restoring culture, but to be a creator of a tribal flag, which defines a nation, is incredibly significant. And I'm just curious how you reflect on just the weight and the significance of what it means to be someone who has literally, from nothing, it sounds like, to help restore the identity and the culture of a nation.
I've never really thought about it that way. I just did my part. I am proud that I was able to participate in doing it. And I think all 3 of us were proud of the outcome that it came. And I really hadn't thought about it going down in history as that. I guess it has, though, and I've learned that it has, but I didn't really think about it at that time, and that's not the reason. That wasn't the reason. Just we participated because we were requested to, and then there was a lot of meaning. I'm sure the other tribes' flags share their meaning also, but there was a lot of meaning for us. I know the other day somebody said something about, what is this deal with the buffalo? Why is it buffalo everything? And that's when I heard the lady say, she said, that was our Walmart. And I never really looked at it like that, but that's true enough. Back in those days, there were no stores. And so you did what you did. But I'm proud to have been a part of that. And I'm just glad that it's historical now. I am. I also made the motion, I don't know, I think maybe it was 2013 or 14, to change the name of the tribe. And in our meetings in our general council, you have to submit something, and then you wait a year until it comes back around for voting. And I don't know why one of us that had been employed by the tribe hadn't thought of it before 2013. That's when it was for sure. To change the name, because the name did not reflect the people. The legal name on all the documentation was the Quapaw Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. There was more Quapaws other places, especially longevity-wise. Initially, there was some in Kansas. They weren't just all in Oklahoma. And they're all over the world now. So to me, that was just not reflecting what we were. Mm-hmm. And we would get these grants and things from the government, would come up with new ideas, government to government contracts and government to government, this and that. If we're a government, then we're a nation. And I felt like it should reflect that. So I made a motion to change the name to Quapaw Nation. We've always been this, or we've always been that, was the argument, which is true. We've always been the Quapaw Tribe of Oklahoma, but we're proud Quapaw of Quapaw.
I'm curious, how do you navigate or feel about maybe that dual, I don't even know if it's a dual belonging as a people from Eastern Arkansas, what is today Arkansas, but to be here in Oklahoma? How do you navigate through a sense of belonging or a sense of place?
First off, I'm proud to be an American. Many Quapaws fought for this country, whether they were Quapaw or whether they were Arkansasian, wherever they were from. My family is a family of veterans. And I think that we even though the government did us wrong, so many times, we're still proud to be part of the United States of America. And I am also. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I wouldn't want to be a citizen of any other country. But I'm also Quapaw. And no matter where we've come from, we weren't initially in Arkansas. We ended up there. So coming from the Siouan tribes, which were more up north and west, probably some, Ohio Valley, migrating down, just like people move now. I'm a Missourian now, whether I want to be or not. Right. I am, because that's where I live, but I'm still an Okie. And I think the transference is you are what you are. And I think that I know that we were a Siouan tribe and a part of many other tribes. That's just, I compare it to living in the East. My aunt and uncle lived in Maine for many years. And you know how they talk. And then people in Louisiana, how they talk. And they lived in Canada for a while, and had a person when I was there say, "You talk like you're from the South." I said, "Oh no." I said, "If you heard somebody from the South, actually from the South talk, you would know that I wasn't from the South." It's just like languages. You just meld, I guess you'd say. You're just satisfied to be what you are.
And based on your perspective today, what do you feel like maybe are some of the biggest challenges that the Ogakalpa people face today?
That's a hard one, because I really don't know. It depends on your family and your background. I know some struggle with drugs and alcohol. I'm fortunate that my family does not. Some struggle with jobs and having jobs. That's one thing that, opportunity-wise, the tribe has supplied a lot of jobs for those that may not have had jobs. Or maybe they have better ones now, hopefully. As far as the nation itself, I still see a lot of issues with the government. there are people that, and maybe they don't do it intentionally, but they have a job to do with the Bureau of Indian Affairs or whomever to help the tribes. And I really don't feel like they still put forth the effort that they should to do that. Of course, the tribes now are getting more and more independence from the government, and they're getting more and more independent in their culture and in their land use and in everything legally, and where before we had to depend on them wholly. And that's a good thing. But still there's that, I don't know, in the shadows, they're like, they still got their thumb on you kind of thing. I don't know how to explain it thoroughly, but there's that. And then in this area, there's not so much prejudices that like there used to be. I don't think that's probably an issue. The struggles would be to maintain our culture. And now I had an interview with a man from the local television station several years ago. And he was following up with a story that had been with Pauline Whitebird, who made hundreds of buckskin dresses, she and Midge and Bert. And that entails the hides and the beadwork and just everything to make an outfit for a young lady to participate in the powwow. And I guess at that time she told that gentleman that was interviewing her that she thought it would be a lost art. So when he interviewed me, he asked me why I thought that she said that, because it wasn't. And of course, growing up with that, being there, seeing that happen continually for years, I learned how. But I really didn't pass that on at the time. I did assist others in making a ceremony dress for their children or my relatives or whatever. But a lot of families were not doing it. A lot of people were not doing it at the time that she was doing it or in her end time. They weren't following that path. And I said, I think that she felt that it probably would be a lost art because young people, or even not just young people like youth, but middle-aged people were not doing it. They weren't passing it on. They weren't learning how to do it. But that changed after she passed away. And I saw the change, not just, but my children's ages. And young people my age were teaching them how to do it and teaching them how to sing and teaching them the songs and teaching them the culture. And they started doing that because they could see that it was going to be lost if they didn't. The language, especially the language. And so that changed. And I think she probably thought when she was in her latter years that it would be lost. And the language was almost lost, not necessarily the dress and everything. But now the Cultural Committee currently is trying to find the original photos or what the original dress was. And I'm almost afraid that it is probably almost too late to find out what that originally was, because it wasn't buckskin dresses like we know now. There weren't beads like that, like we have now, or there were hides. There was plenty of those, but the times have changed. That's why Quapaw dresses, for one thing, there's a collar. And I use this as an example. My first one, the collar came down to my shoulder, maybe. Now they hang over. Now they're fancier. Now they have beads or silver on them or whatever. And girls want it to be better than what they've seen before. They want it to be fancier and stuff. So times change, and we realize that. But I would like to see, I'd like mine to be like it used to be. But times change and kids change. Electronics, for instance, you know yourself, or maybe you're electronic, but I'm not. If I have something go wrong with my phone or my computer, I have to ask my granddaughter to come and fix it for me. I hope I answered your question.
You did, absolutely. I think the root of the question is really that historical, cultural reclaiming, if you will, or rebuilding of that. Really curious. I know as early on you worked at Seneca Indian School, and I'm curious your experience there around what that experience was like.
That's another one of those situations with Indians. It was good, but not good. Now, Seneca Indian School, when I went to work there, it was in 1968, I think. And I worked in the school building for the principal. Of course, it was a boarding school. But by that time, harshness was supposed to be something that was done away with. And superintendent was Richard Fitzgerald at the time. And he made sure of that. He was one that actually, he did not allow it. Or if he knew it, he would not allow it. There were only children there that were school age at that time. Now, previous to that, there were younger children. And some of the children that were there were from Florida or Louisiana or somewhere in the South, Georgia, some of the Choctaws. And it was my understanding that it was either there or a reform school for those some that had traveled far. Some, of course, were just because of poverty, or some that came from homes that were just not, where their parents were just not being parents and couldn't afford for them to be there. They had everything that a public school would have. They had sports and activities, but of course they were confined, and they did have runaways. And the principal would send me out, look for kids, and as an adult, you're not going to find them. You're not. They're going to hide, and they're going to come out whenever they get ready. So it was a lost cause. You'd go in one end of the dormitory, and they'd go out the other. It was just futile. But you'd try. But they did have they created a grandparent program, which was really a good thing. And I don't know if they did all over in places like Carlisle and bigger schools, because Seneca was just small. They fed them, but they had this grandparent program where elderly people or people that were still capable of mobility to come and stay in the dormitories with the little kids during after school and before school, help them get ready for school, help them after school, help them with their homework and things like that. And then in the summertime, they had programs with arts and crafts and different things for those that had no homes to go to, which there weren't a lot left in the summertime. But Seneca was pretty calm, unlike the larger schools. Carlisle was horrible. The situation there, I don't know if you watched, and I hate to compare this to a TV show because most of the time they're lying about what they show, but 1923.
Yes, ma'am.
That was probably true enough from the stories that I've heard over my lifetime and about some of the Quapaws that were sent to Carlisle and the things that they had to do. And they couldn't speak their language. They cut their hair. They made them wear white people clothes. And not that they didn't learn English and reading and writing. Not that wasn't a good thing, but how they went about it was so wrong. Again, the government. It was a travesty. So sad. How would you have to put yourself in the position of those people? Say you lived on the reservation in Arizona And they came and took your children and sent them to Pennsylvania. And then you never saw them again. Maybe they were dead, and maybe they weren't, but you never saw them again. And they were completely taken away from their families, their homes, their way of life. How wrong is that? It's horrible. It was horrible. And it's still horrible today. And no matter how many apologies the U.S. government can make, it's not the same people. The government now is not the government then. It's not the people that made the decisions of what to do, what not to do. You can only hope that they had to pay the price for what they did. Or I do. And maybe that's wrong, but how wrong did they do? How wrong was that to take those children from their parents and from their families? I don't care how bad your life is. Moving you clear across the country to a whole different life is just wrong. Sad. Very sad.
I am curious your reaction to the recent apology and milestone. Is it a marker? Does it matter?
If it was your child, would it matter?
It would.
I don't think so. I think they got caught. That's my opinion. They got caught. They found all these graves. They were caught. They had to answer for it. They want it to go away. So apologize. The people they need to apologize to are dead and gone. Sure, maybe their families, some of them still are here and realize that, but would it mean anything? No, probably not. It wouldn't to me. I don't think. I'm not in that position, so I really can't say for sure how I would feel, but I can think that I would not care what they say. And what is the answer? There really isn't one, because offering money or something, what would that do? That's not going to bring them back. That's not going to make the change. That's not going to make history. It's just a black mark in the history of the United States government, and they need to own it. They need to tell the truth, and I don't think they can make it go away, nor do I think they should try to make it go away. I don't think they should try to apologize and think that it's going to be all better, because it's not. It's not going to change the fact that it happened, and it should never have happened. All of those graves, all of those children, I just can't even imagine. I can't even imagine if I was in part of that. And I will say this, at Seneca, I only knew of one time when perhaps a teacher got overzealous with a child in a closet. But they weren't angels, and I'm sure probably, but what kid is? And would you want to be rebellious? Would you? What reaction would you have if you were, especially maybe a teenager, and you were removed from all the things that you'd ever lived your whole life doing and knowing, and treated like that? Would you be rebellious? Yeah, I think so. But in one time right after I left there, AIM came to the school, but they were just traveling across the United States, trying to make people aware of what some of the things that were going on. And they weren't rebellious, or there were no fightings or boisterous outbursts or anything like that. They were just meeting with the tribal leaders. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that. I think they just need to own it. It's not going to go away. It's just part of the history. Just like slavery and different things, that it's not going to go away. Do I wish they'd make more movies about it? If they tell the truth. If they'd tell the truth. And I believe that was part of the truth in that show that I saw. As well as the Quapaws had every tribe had their Trail of Tears, and every tribe had the Quapaws, the killers of the flower moon, and the Osage. Of course, the Osage and Quapaws were one at one time. Some of the wealthy Quapaws at the time of the mines had history like that too. They killed people for their money, and they, not as severe as what they did with her and her family, but Chief Standing Bear is a friend of mine, and I called him and congratulated him when I saw the movie, and he said they had total control over, except for the dramatic parts in the storytelling. And I said it was really great to tell those stories, and they need to tell them. And I wish more of that would happen for the Native American tribes, because we all have stories that are just unheard of that should be heard and known what's happened to us. It's not just certain ethnicity that have had that. We've had it too since the beginning.
I'm very thankful for your willingness to just talk through that. It's a very, I can tell it's a very difficult thing to talk through. And I don't want to ask questions that cause that. I do agree with you that those stories need to be told, though, from an understanding. And I think what I have seen, I had the privilege of attending this powwow this last year, and what I see is a lot of beauty and a lot of hope. And so I think what I see today is moving towards a place of great hope and great beauty. And so we will go there, if you will. I'm not a member, a part of the Quapaw Nation. I'm eager to learn your story. I'm eager to understand what it means to honor the past and to be truthful about it. I'm curious what you would say to maybe people like me that are from other places, either in Arkansas or across the country, who are asking questions about what does it mean to honor the original caretakers of the land and the place, and to have an honest conversation about the actions of what's happened. I'm curious what you would want to say to maybe communities outside of this place that you feel like is important for them to know about your story or about the people.
It makes me think back to, what did it take for other ethnic groups to make people aware of their plight? How did they start their stories and things? And of course, I think you can't believe what's on the internet. You can't believe stories that you see always in the movies. So you can't, just like in the video that the tribe has made, the voices of the elders, when Vicki Jones was talking about, she's very dark complected. You can tell she's Native American just by looking at her. And she didn't want to be when she was little, and played with her friends, she didn't want to be the Indian. She wanted to be the cowboy. And because of the TV shows, because of what people are led to believe. I would want to look back maybe on what other ethnic groups did to make people more aware of their plights, and maybe utilize some of those ways. Now, in the past, it's been books, and I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that's going to be something in our past. But for whatever that is that we can do to make people more aware, like Killers of the Flower Moon. The thing about Native Americans is they're very closed grouped. What this tribe might not want others to know about them, or each one might not want them to know their story, want people to know their story. But how are people going to know about us if we don't allow them to know our story? So I do see electronics, YouTube's, Netflix. We have a lot of things now on YouTube. The tribe does. But what do you do to get people to want to look at that? Sure, they have the business committee meetings on there. Nobody wants to look, except tribal members want to look at that and to see what But there are things now. Several years ago, people were making videos of powwows and how to make a fan or how to beadwork or how you do this or how you do that. And more of that, I think, is being put out there, which I know helps. But what do you do to get a lot of people to note that? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what you would. I don't think probably in my lifetime that Native Americans will be the center of attention. And to me, that's sad because we were the original citizens. And not taking anything away from other ethnic groups, but we were here first. And there's not that much knowledge that has been shared. And that's probably partially because the tribes they didn't write down history. They told the stories and they passed them down internally. And so now it's getting to where a little bit more voices of the Ogapaw are getting out there more. And they're adding more to it and more to it all the time, which is a good thing, I think. I'm all for it if it's the truth. But then I'm sure some people look at it and think, oh, they just made that up. That didn't really happen. When probably it did. And because it's hard to think, like if you lived in Arkansas, as you do, that the Quapaws own millions of acres of land, millions with an M. And now they have nothing in Arkansas, basically. Mounds and mounds and a casino. But is that believable? Is that really believable? Do you think people in Arkansas believe that? Those that have possibly studied it or looked into the history of Arkansas, but I don't even know what the history books of Arkansas say. Maybe it starts there. Maybe Arkansas needs to include that in its learning process, establish the actual beginning of Arkansas and then what happened to it. And they'd have to put the Quapaws in there because they were there. I really don't know the answer in succeeding in doing that, but I'd say probably it's going to come to visual knowledge of somehow, if the truth can be known, if the truth can be told.
What do you feel like in that truth telling? If you were going to tell the truth, what would you tell? What would you want to see in the books and the stories that you really feel represents the true spirit of the Quapaw people?
Just like the voices of the Ogapaw says, we came down the rivers. We landed in different places, going upstream, downstream, and the middle people. And that was our home. That was our homeland. We owned it. We wanted to be there. We, like in the show, it's accidental. Some of it was accidental, but they were traveling on purpose to get a better life. And they found that in Arkansas. And they found that in the lands where they ended up. And I think they were proud to be those people and to be there. And I would have been. I'm still proud for them to have been there and to have lived that life and had that. They said they could see cornfields for miles, and I'm sure they could in my mind's eye. I can see that. I can see them doing that. Think what they had to do it, though. So they had to love it. They had to love their life and love where they were at and love being there and love doing that in order to be so successful.
Yeah, I'm curious, standing here today, what are your hopes for the Ogapaw people?
And you said that about Ogapaw. It came from Ogapaw, but Arkansas, English people put their spin on it. Thusly, why the name of your state's Arkansas.
Yeah, we mispronounced a whole lot of words.
Yeah, that's right. My hopes is that we can, as a people, we can continue to succeed. Now, as the ex-gaming regulator, I feel that we should put more emphasis possibly on diversity, not so much on depending on gaming. Of course, that's where it is right now. But if the laws change and internet gaming or sportsbook gaming goes legally across the United States, bricks and mortar will be in dire need. And of course, that's our dependence. We depend on that. So I would like to see the tribe look into, in the future, to more endeavors, more something that's more definitely not going to go away or not possibly go away at some point in time. Now, will gaming ever go away completely? No. But something that would be more substantially profitable for long term. And I would like for them to continue now that they have in the last few years, they've started many wonderful programs. Language being one of the most important, daycare and dress and classes in beadwork and the words, reading, writing, language, and just getting together and doing things, and then continuing cultural activities like we just had our gathering last weekend, and continuing to bring back some of the things that have gone by the wayside. And I'm in hopes that they continue to do those things, to have the people interested that are, and not necessarily someone that gets paid to do it, but someone that really wants to do it in their heart. They want to continue doing it. They want it to continue. As a nation, we want to continue our culture. And that the division, there's, of course, in some of the things that have happened in our past, there's been several divisions. And for us to get together and again and be in one accord. I know you're dreaming if you think everybody's going to get along all the time, because they're not. And I know that. But for us to look to the future in a more positive group, you might say. And those are some of the things I think the young people now are. I am afraid, though, that the downside to that is there are so many that aren't teaching their children or their children's children. Now, I've even tried to teach my granddaughter that's a Quapaw. She knows some of the ways, but not enough to, I'm afraid, that generation, even her generation, she's 20 years old, won't pass that on as much as it was passed on to me from my mother and father. And that's a fear. There are so many that are just a little bit Quapaw. They haven't been brought up this way, and that's not their fault. It's really not anybody's fault because some didn't have the opportunity. But will it be possible? I don't know. Probably not. I just hope that even though they may just be 2024 Quapaw, I hope that they at least try and maintain the history and some of the culture and pass that on to future generations.
That's why the work that you're doing is so significant. And yeah, I will hope with you, because from my very limited, very small view of watching and having conversations with people who are the wisdom keepers and the cultural committees, and watching the beauty of a powwow it is a beauty and a culture that must persist for sure. I want to maybe close our conversation with the question that I ask everyone. When you think about our conversation and the work that you're doing within the Quapaw Nation around rebuilding a culture and celebrating the beauty of a people, I'm curious, when I say wholeness, what does that mean to you? What could wholeness look like for you within the context of our conversation?
Well, in the real world, we know that probably is something that can never be reached for the Ogapaw. To be whole as they were originally. You can't remove people from their land that they bought in good faith and now live in Arkansas just like yourself. Unlike when the Quapaws were there, the government came in and said, we're moving you. What would people in Arkansas now, what would they do if the government came in and said, you have to move? We're going to move you to Oklahoma. Would they protest? Would they rebel? Would they fight? Would they shoot people? Probably. All of those things. So in order for the Ogapaw to get any wholeness at this point in our history, it's probably not possible. It's possible to move on from here with what we have to work with. And like I said before, I think we need to try to strive to be more professionally caring about each other. And possibly, I think that there are many that are striving to be better and to have the tribe better and to hold the culture and to get back the customs and continue on with them as they were or make them even better. And I think that's probably what we can hope for. But as far as wholeness in our heritage and our past, I think that's gone. And you just have to make the best out of what you have left. And I hope that we can do that. We've gone from a tribe of 300 and some to 5,000 and some. Now, is it different? Yeah, it's a lot different. And is it good? Good and bad. And I hope that those that are getting placed on our enrollment status can realize that they are part of something that's wonderful and huge and have a goal to continue having it that way and to keep the culture and to keep the language and the tribes and the ways and some of the things that go on. And I guess that is probably all you could wish for wholeness in this day and age. I just hope that can happen. If that can happen and they can continue on, then maybe there will be Quapaws for the rest of time. And someone to tell the story or to pass on the story that has started many years ago.
Ms. Collier, I don't know that I have a response other than I'm going to hope with you that the work that you're doing continues to build a culture and a people in an incredible way. And I'm so humbled and thankful to just sit at the table and share it with you, to have the privilege of hearing your story firsthand. And just thank you for who you are, and thank you for showing me the beauty of people that I've not known before. And thank you for this time. I'm incredibly grateful to you.
Thank you. I'm honored to have been asked and just hope that you got the information that you were actually needing. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people that can probably give you much more historical information than I, but I've been around a long time, so I guess that's good.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, this conversation with Barbara is more than history. It's about presence and resilience and the ongoing work of belonging. The Quapaw Nation story is deeply woven into the land that we now call Arkansas, not as some distant past, but as a living thread that continues to shape this place today. Barbara's life and work reminds us that the fight for sovereignty, for cultural preservation, and for justice is not a closed chapter. It's still unfolding here and now. From advocating for the Quapaw Nation's self-determination to carrying forward traditions passed down through the generations, Barbara's story challenges us to listen, to learn, and to see the land that we stand on now with new eyes. And I want to mention this. The fact that there are no full-blood Quapaw people left today is not just a historical detail. It's the direct result of generations of policies that sought to dismantle Indigenous identity, break apart families, sever cultural traditions, and force assimilation into a dominant society. This systematic destruction of language, traditions, and sovereignty was an attempt to erase a culture, but it did not succeed. For many, this is an uncomfortable truth, one that challenges the narratives that we've inherited about progress and expansion. But I believe that if we can be honest about that truth, there is freedom to be found. The story of the Quapaw is not just about loss, it's about endurance and resilience and restoration. Despite every effort to erase them, the Quapaw people are still here. Their presence is not just a memory. It is a future being reclaimed, and it's a testament to the strength of all peoples, something that we need to learn so desperately. For those who believe in justice, reconciliation, and the restoration of all things, this is a story that we cannot turn away from. It is an invitation to see and to listen and to reckon with what has been broken, so that together we can work towards what renewal may look like in this world today. As we continue this season, we're going to keep working within the layered histories that shape Northwest Arkansas, stories of removal and resilience and reckoning, but also stories of strength and survival, and the knowledge that Indigenous communities carry forward today that can shape the future for us all. And from here, we're going to begin to move forward in time in the story of Northwest Arkansas. My next guest is Boyce Uphold. He's an author and editor, and his recent book, The Great River, is an expansive and deeply researched work about life on the Mississippi River. But Boyce's work goes beyond the river itself. It explores how this body of water not only shaped the history of Arkansas, which shaped Northwest Arkansas, but it also was the expansionist vision of manifest destiny and shaped the mythology of American masculinity.
One of the lasting legacies of these early years on the Mississippi River is there's this Jeffersonian vision of expansive land, and we have done that, but more so this wild, feral idea of American masculinity emerged on the Mississippi River, I tend to think. And that's what American men on the frontier wanted to be. They didn't want to be gentlemen farmers. They wanted to be these rough and tumble, half horse, half alligator men. And I think I look at what's happening today in our political culture and some of the schisms in our culture, and I'm like, that's never gone away.
Well, I look forward to sharing this conversation because we're going to discuss how the Mississippi River has been more than just a geographical landmark. It has been a force of power and economy and imagination, shaping the land and the people and the very identity of this place. Until then, I want to thank you for listening to The Underview. If this conversation has moved you, I encourage you to share it, talk about it, carry it forward. These are stories that I believe deserve to be heard. So thank you again for your work. Your work is an important, maybe the most important part in the shaping of our place.